Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
William White, the official geologist of the North American Dogman project, yes, part of our science team, has once again stopped in to the Fox Den tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. Yeah, I am so depleted of nutrients. Much better. Absolutely delicious. And now that I am fully revamped and ready to roll, it is time for William and I to take a walk into the darkness.
My creatures of the night, yes, once again I arise, and it is time for Midnight Lycanthropy. And guess who has decided to return and blow our mind with some more pivotal information? William White, the NADP specialist in geology and many other aspects. How are you doing tonight, William? Good to have you back.
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited to get talking about these new topics we're going to cover.
Yes, this is excellent. Well, let's get rolling. You take the stage here.
All right. So, what as a geologist, one of the things that we study is geomorphology, which is how the Earth changes due to natural events. Earthquakes, floods. In this case, what I want to talk about, ice ages. And the most recent ice age was roughly about 10,000 years ago. Technically, we still are living under an ice age. But obviously, we don't have ice sheets in our backyard anymore. That most recent ice age, it covered much of the northern part of North America, pretty much all of Canada, Alaska, and the northern Great Plains states like Michigan, much of Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York. These states were all under ice. Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're famous for having thousands of lakes. Well, the reason why they have thousands of lakes is as the ice sheet receded and melted, that water collected in any low-lying area of ground, right? So that's how basically all the terrain in these states was formed as far as what we've encountered, in our lifetime. Along with that ice sheet, that ice age, were these famous megafauna. That's what they're called. Things like the woolly mammoth, the saber-toothed tiger, dire wolves, short-faced bears, giant ground sloths, and a whole bunch of other creatures. One of the creatures that has been identified as having existed during that time period were North American hyenas, which, there have been examples found that are quite large. You were actually just mentioning that, you saw a documentary saying that they found a skeleton about as big as a polar bear's for a North American hyena. Is that right?
Yes, that is very correct. So now we have a ton of different variations from African to North American to European to cave hyenas. And then you have this ancestral relative. So we definitely have some interesting things to dive into for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And just like most creatures. For instance, there were North American lions, and they were significantly larger than African lions are today. They went extinct along with most of those creatures. So just like most of those Ice Age creatures, these hyenas were larger than their modern counterparts found in Africa today. Big reason for that, kind of getting nerdy about it, is when you live in cold temperature, it's much easier to maintain your body temperature, especially like in the case of a mammal, the more mass you have. I mean, that's why whales are huge. That's why walruses are huge. That's why woolly mammoths thrived and survived, these elephant-sized creatures, cousins of modern elephants, in that Ice Age environment, because they had massive body mass, which allowed them to generate heat and then retain that heat. Just like if you have a large block of, say, metal and you heat it up to glowing red, it's going to take a lot longer for that metal to cool down to room temperature than if you had, say, a ball bearing sized piece of metal that you heated up to glowing red. There's just more mass. It's going to hold on to that heat longer. That's why the megafauna was as big as it was. So in the case of that giant cave hyena and even the other Ice Age North American hyenas, we're looking at creatures that are possibly roughly the same size as is being reported for Dogman sightings today. Something that if it were on its hind feet would be 6 to 8 feet tall and maybe even 10 feet tall. A polar bear is about 10 feet tall. My thoughts on this, and we kind of alluded to it last week in our discussion, are that we're not really looking at a creature that's a dog or a wolf or in any way related to those. It may look like a dog or a wolf to people because that's what we're used to seeing. You got it deeper than skin deep, I think, with this. I think if it's an actual biological creature, there's a good chance that it is a descendant of those Ice Age hyenas. That's one of the theories I've worked on for actually quite some time. There's other scientific reasons, at least in my mind, for that. One of the reasons why humans and dogs kind of got together and became good friends, or ancient wolves actually that then became dogs, is we actually have similar hunting styles. If you're a human and you don't have a gun, you don't even have a bow and arrow, how you're going to big animal to feed your tribe or your family is you're going to go and chase that thing down. We sweat, and when we're in good shape, we can run and run and run and stay cool because of our sweat. Basically, all we need is water to keep going. We'll run off our fat cells. We've got almost an infinite battery of body fat. Even when you're skinny, you've still got a lot of body fat. So a human will chase down, let's say a gazelle or a deer. And that gazelle or deer is going to overheat and get exhausted before the human does. When it's exhausted and overheated, then the human can go in there with a sharp stick or a rock and take it out. So that's called persistence hunting. One of the only other animals that does that is the wolf or the dog. Canines can be persistent hunters. And that's one of the reasons why we got along so well. We actually ended up using our dogs to help in our hunts. Well, the interesting thing about that is, modern Americans aside, if you average out the body weight of all the people on Earth, especially historically, the average weight for an adult male is about 135 pounds. And the average weight for a gray wolf is roughly 135 pounds. So these two creatures that seem very different but actually have a very similar form of hunting also have a very similar body weight, which makes me think, now, I'm not an animal expert. I'm just a geologist, and we do study fossils. But it makes me think that there's a reason why these two persistent hunter species are about that same size. It might be the ideal size for running another animal to exhaustion to finish it off. Now, the dogmen that are being reported are generally not 135 pounds, not at least by estimate. They're being reported as being 6.5, 7, 8 feet tall, muscular like a linebacker, if a linebacker were 8 feet tall, or a bodybuilder if a bodybuilder were 8 feet tall, right? And so that leads people to estimate their weight as being anywhere from 400 to 800 pounds, maybe even 1,000 pounds in the case of some of these 10 or 12 foot tall alpha dogmen that are being reported. Now, if you're something that big, you're going to be fast over a short distance. You're going to be super strong. It's not going to behoove you to hunt something down to exhaustion, to participate in persistence hunting, because you're going to overheat. Like we talked about with those woolly mammoths and the big megafauna of the Ice Age, that body mass will get warm and stay warm. So large animals like that, like the tiger, like lions, even bears, they typically hunt through ambush. They'll wait, kind of hidden, you know, maybe stalking along in the case of a tiger, very stealthy, very sneaky, and then they'll pounce. They'll move in real fast, real hard, overwhelm their prey with violence, get them down, break their neck, rip it out, whatever, and feed. So, that's another reason why I think we're not looking at a canid. I think we're looking at something else, something that hunts through ambush, and by a lot of accounts actually has more of the physical appearance of a hyena. The longer forelimbs, the shorter back limbs. Some people have described a mane. How many wolves have manes? I've never seen a wolf with a mane. I have seen hyenas that basically have a fringe on the back of their head that looks similar to a mane. So that's one of the things that I really wanted to express last week. We just didn't have time. We got into so many other good topics, and I kind of wanted to bounce that off you and see how you felt about that.
I love it all right there, man. And that's why I always try to get you back on here and try to collaborate with you as much as possible and pick your mind. You make valid points on all that. I mean, look at any sort of large predator. It's a grizzly bear is going to explode at you, but then if you do distance yourself, sure, it's going to keep potentially stalking you, but it's not like sprinting right after you. And like you said, with large cats, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe they said tigers and cats are only really active like 3 to 4 hours a day, and then they
Oh yeah.
rest because they don't want to expel that type of energy. So
Yep.
yes, as you stated, like the smaller type animals like coyotes or wolves, and I don't even know if coyotes run down their prey like that. I know they kind of stalk behind, but I don't know if they're more opportunistic. I
They are
feel that.
opportunistic, yeah. I think they might, if they could. But once again, I think there's this fine Goldilocks zone of body mass, right? Dogs and wolves, we store a little bit of fat on us. That fat's wonderful because when you've burned up all your, in our case, humans, when you've burned up all your carbs, you still have that fat store that your body can switch over to and keep going with that. And wolves, of course, they don't in nature eat hardly any carbohydrates. They're just living, their energy is coming from fat all day long. So yeah, they've got the right body mass that they can sacrifice some ounces of fat in a long pursuit if the goal is worth it, right? If it's a big animal that's going to restore those energy cells, whereas a coyote, you're looking at an animal that's somewhere between maybe 35 and 60 pounds. If it's a big eastern coyote, they just don't have as much stored energy as a wolf or a human. So from what I understand, they will pursue prey, but they are much more opportunistic. They're much more scavengers or going after smaller, helpless creatures that aren't going to run, like young deer. At least here in Ohio, they're well known for decimating the deer herds by eating the fawns when they're born. So
Again, opportunistic, and I'm going to try to be humorous for a second, but it's like Wile E. Coyote back in the Looney Tunes. You know how he's always trying to be opportunistic. Well,
right.
obviously he's never successful, but as you just stated right there, that just kind of proves they're always trying to be sly and I guess sneaky, and that would make a ton of logical sense. And also with predators that are pack based, you can either A, be taken care of, I guess, or B, be cannibalized. When you're a solo hunter like a tiger or
Mm-hmm.
a grizzly bear, yeah, you really need to be more opportunistic because if you injure yourself, you're pretty much crap out of luck unless you got a free food source from either a person or a dumpster, etc.
Well, they say that's one of the few reasons why a grizzly bear will actually hunt a human. Right. There's plenty of attacks where it's like territorial or they're defending their cubs or whatever. But in the cases where a grizzly bear is actually attacking a human to consume them, it's usually because it's wounded or elderly and it can't get any other faster, prey. So yeah, absolutely.
Which makes sense too. And also, I think human beings have a huge disconnect where we assume that animals, because we're human, avoid us. And I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day that, as you just stated, yeah, you have elderly predators that have figured that out because they're smart and they're still hungry. But
Right.
just in general, I mean, you could have a tiger, you could have a grizzly bear, a great white shark. They might not be looking for a person, but say this grizzly bear has been looking around for the past 5 or 6 hours and he's hungry or she's hungry and they've only gotten some berries and some little mice and moles, and you and I stumble out in the middle of this open prairie. People seem to think this bear it's just going to ignore us. And sure, they might if they've just eaten and they have bigger things that they're stalking. But if that bear is hungry, it might not necessarily at that point in time be a quote unquote human eater, but it's still going to take a shot.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like people get that misconception where, oh, predators don't go out of their way. Yes, correct. But there are some that do, like saltwater crocodiles, for example,
Oh, yeah.
stalk people, and literally you have to not go down to the water at the
Right.
same points in time. And people will be like, oh, well, reptiles aren't intelligent. Well, that's not correct, because if you look at a saltwater crocodile, it's literally stalking you. And if you also look at skeletal remains from ancient saltwater crocodiles in comparison to now, they're almost identical
Yeah,
because
they
they
haven't
are,
changed hardly at all.
yeah, they're perfect predators.
They're ambush predators. Once again, you're talking about something that can be 2,000 or 3,000 pounds, 21 feet long for some of these big ones. They're not, sprinting down the beach for 10 miles. Nope, they're waiting in the water as sneaky as can be.
And then boom, exactly. The reason I stated that is just making the logical and trying to give listeners and viewers a
Oh yeah.
comparison of other animals and just how they hunt. Same thing with like great white sharks. They're not exploding the whole time like a mako shark. A
No,
mako
they're just
shark is
usually
a,
cruising very efficiently through the
yes,
water until it's time to get something.
yes.
Yeah.
Whereas a mako shark's more like a wolf. It's built more sleek and it can hit,
Yep.
I don't know, like 30, 40 miles per hour in the water.
Lower
And
body mass.
yes.
Exactly.
And so I wanted to also bounce this off you. This is some interesting stuff that was shared to me, and I did some research on. So in India, there's been numerous cases of monkeys taking puppies and also wild wolves. They've become like guardians for these groups of monkeys as they get older
They
and they can
raise
no
them.
longer. Yes. And like you were
Awesome.
just saying, how back in the day when we befriended wolves, with that technique of they were helping us and we were helping them.
Yep.
So these monkeys can obviously feed these animals when they're able to feed, but they're no longer able to necessarily be as defending themselves. So now you have these dogs, like we use dogs. And I found that to be completely interesting because you have a lot of these cases where people are maybe putting together correlations of Sasquatch using dogmen as hunting
Oh,
dogs.
yeah.
And what I'm thinking is same thing is I think the ones that we're seeing with them, they might have snagged these quote unquote dogman puppies when they were younger and raised them, yes, to do that, be like their type guard dogs for their kids. But I don't think the normal dogman in general is cool with the Sasquatch, just as I don't think a wild wolf is cool with the monkey. But obviously, if it's raised by you, then there's familiar there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've just recently seen a few accounts of people who claim they've seen Dogman and Sasquatch working together like that. If those accounts are accurate, then that would make sense. Because, think about it. In India, a wolf pack would probably love to get their hands on a monkey, right? Tear it apart,
One,
eat it, of course.
yes,
But then if the monkeys raise a puppy, yeah, exactly. It's going to imprint on them. It's going to feel like it's part of their pack. And yeah, it'll be loyal and whatever to them. So yeah, who knows? The same could extend to Dogman. Once again, we're kind of impugning canid-like abilities and emotions on something that we're trying to say might not be a canid. I
oh,
don't know enough
exactly.
about hyena behavior to say whether or not they would imprint like that or not.
People have to think that a hyena is obviously extremely intellectual.
Yeah, they're smart for sure, no doubt. Yeah.
And if you look at a lot of the things across the country that are occurring where people are finding strange burrows, I mean, I know hyenas make like burrows and type den areas, and they are also packs, but they can be solo as well, and they're a pretty hardy animal.
That's interesting that you bring that up. I was just watching a documentary about this. I forget the name of it, but it was a bear. The short-faced bear is supposed to have been bigger than a grizzly bear or a polar bear. I mean, an absolute monster. Well, this bear was in that same family, but even bigger than the short-faced bear, and they find its bones in like Argentina and that side of South America. And apparently, they find its bones mostly in these burrows. These like they're basically a tunnel system that was dug out by ice age animals. A lot of these large animals, like ground sloths and stuff like that, yeah, they would tunnel into the earth to make their shelters. I don't know if to protect themselves from the cold or from predators, but that's interesting that you bring that up because that does sound like an ice age animal behavior. To be digging these large burrows, large enough for say a cave hyena or a dogman.
They go all down into the ground, and they also have foliage over top of them, and they're
Hmm.
into the sides of riverbanks. And I know Jan Thompson's father had spoken about that in the area of the LBL at an old sawmill, where also there was huge holes deep into the ground with animal parts kind of scattered all around, with obviously something was feeding on them. And if you think like how a trapdoor spider works, honestly, you and I are walking, right? And then there's foliage all around. Okay, there's a hole under there that we don't know about. One of these things just snags you. You turn around, I'm no longer there.
Oh
Are
yeah.
you looking all around for this hole in the ground? No, you begin panicking. You probably start running to try to see the direction I was. More or less, the point I'm trying to make is where people go missing,
Yeah.
and that you have these cave hyenas that existed. You have these strange burrows that are appearing. You have prehistoric animals that used to build burrows and dens like that. We don't explore cave systems. People are going missing in these areas. There's just a lot of potential evidence to support that, as stated by yourself and
Oh
Colleen
yeah.
and myself, that cave hyenas never really went extinct. Why would they? They are one of the most hardy animals out there.
I mean, let's say that they have a digit that could function as somewhat of a opposable thumb. You know, give them 100,000 years, they may not be to modern human levels, but it seems like when animals get that ability, look at raccoons, they're clever as can be. When animals get the ability to manipulate the world around them with by grabbing onto stuff with their hands, it changes things, doesn't it? You know, they start to develop intellectually a lot faster. Yeah, so you could have gone from what was early on pretty much just a hyena that lived in caves in the ice age in North America. And remember, we had several ice ages, over the last 500,000 years. This creature may be, much older than just the most recent ice age. And give it time to develop and evolve, and you may get something that's a lot smarter, a lot sneakier than its original ancestors. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Preach, my friend. And also, a lot of people too don't realize with fossil remains, I mean, the megalodon, they have just like teeth. So there's so many animals
Yeah.
and dinosaurs that we're just recently finding. So there's still a ton of species out there that haven't been found. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but how much of skeletal remains have been found of the Gigantopithecus?
I
I
mean,
think
it
just
was just like a molar and maybe a part of a jawbone, and they just extrapolated out from that. They said, "Wow, this is obviously a large primate's molar," and based on how big it is compared to like human molars, compared to great ape molars, like the gorilla, it's got to have been 9 feet tall and 1,200 pounds or something. That they created this whole image of it, and they're probably accurate, right? But
yes,
yeah, I mean that's
yes.
how they do a lot of these things. Like this big bear I was telling you about, I think they only found like some leg bones of it and part of a skull, and from that they said, yep, it's got to be have been 12 feet tall or something like that. It's amazing. So
No, and I mean, if again, like how many complete skeletal remains have been found of the T Rex? I believe just recently, with a couple, they found almost fully connected parts, but I still think they've never found a 100% full skeletal remains of a
oh
T
yeah, I mean
Rex either.
unless you're dealing with the situation where it's like some sort of mud flow or something that covered up the remains before scavengers could get to it. I mean, we're lucky to have any fossils at all, especially in the age of vertebrates. As soon as something that's just free protein, that's free energy for another creature, and they're going to come, they're going to eat it. They're not going to leave its bones alone. Bones have a ton of fat inside them. The big bones do. Marrow, that's awesome energy for an animal to consume. So yeah, we're lucky there's any fossil remains of any of these creatures at all, and that's
I
why
love
fossils are so relatively rare.
No, I love how you just said that, because a great example I use is with my pet squirrel, because I'm going to compare two things here. If she wants, right, and same thing with her friends outside, but her particularly, when I have some nuts and things and she knows, she gets up on her hind legs and she walks towards me like with little hop, almost like walking motions, quite with ease, and she'll spin around and she's on her back feet. She uses her hands, she takes it, she cracks open the nuts, she knows how to open the box of Triscuits. She knows when I have a thing of nuts if I haven't twisted off the top, but she's trying to use her hands to open them. And what I'm trying to get at is like what you were saying is just the articulation of
Oh yeah.
hand use. And people think that a lot of animals can't get up on their back legs and move well. Well, a squirrel uses all four, but I will literally see them perk up and they sit on their hind legs
Oh
while
yeah.
they use their hands quite easily.
Yeah, I mean raccoons will do it too. They're a little clumsy, but they'll do it. And what's the similarity there? Talking about animals that have digits that they can actually grab things with. And I would bet that given enough time on this earth without humans messing with them, they would eventually be the ancestors of some very intelligent raccoon or squirrel race, that evolves from them, right? Because I think that's the trick to, reaching the levels of intelligence that humans and primates have, is the ability to grab and interact with the world. So,
Which makes a huge difference. And recently, I've saw some videos where monkeys were using sticks as almost like spears
yep.
to get fish in the water, because certain species of apes obviously don't like the water, but then there's other species that are diving right in and using their hands to crack open shells, shellfish on the bottom of the water. So no, I think again, just in general, we step back and we don't realize how intelligent animals are and how opportunistic they really can be. And there is something that is grabbing these people in these areas, that there is unknown prints and there are hints that it's some sort of predator, not a human based, by some of the wounds that have been found on the people that have actually been retained, while others that are missing. What's taking these people, and why is it in the areas of the cave systems? That states to me that something, whether hominoid or mammal based, etc., is still using these cave systems. And why would they not? Correct. So if
Sure.
how much of that do we explore? We really don't. It's usually these random people that are up there and then all of a sudden they go missing. How many times has there been huge parties of thousands of people just taking tours all around these cave systems?
Right. I mean, aside from places like Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, or there's another big cave in Arizona, Colossal Cave. Aside from just a few of these kind of tourist locations, yeah, you're getting only hobbyists, only people who are really passionate about cave exploration, right? And God bless them, but that is not for me. I'll tell you what, caves scare me more than almost anything. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's just probably less known about the limestone caves and caverns in Kentucky than there is about the deep ocean or our solar system. I mean, it's just not something that's really been explored. And there's like hundreds of thousands of miles, maybe millions of miles of caves in America, but hundreds of thousands in Ohio and Kentucky, just because of the geology of the land. There's so much of this old 500 million year old limestone, and limestone dissolves under the right circumstances, the right acidity of water, it'll just dissolve, and that's what forms caves. So if you have these areas where the bedrock is limestone, you're going to have, just massive cave systems. And of course, caves scare us, and they're tight and people get stuck in them and never come out. And so most humans don't want to be investigating caves. I know I don't. So
No, I can't agree more. And recently, again, in Saudi Arabia with the Smithsonian, when they were able to find by mistake that whole entire cave system stuffed full of human and animal remains that were pulled in there by hyenas, it just
nice.
shows you right there at points in time, this behavior is still being done. And I know, obviously, it is still occurring.
Yep.
There are still hyenas that exist that use these type of areas. And also, as we were talking about last night with like the railroads and cave systems, animals take the path of least resistance, meaning
Exactly.
if you and I wanted to walk around an area because it's easier, we don't want to walk around the little like divot that goes down. That's not how an animal is. The animal goes across the path of least resistance to spare energy. It's just how it is. So obviously, if you have large cave systems that connect into old mine shafts and areas like that, that's perfect shelter for very many type of animals. Rats or coyotes could go in there, all kinds of things that want to get away from the elements at that point in time. And also, if they don't want to be around people, well, yes, those are perfect areas to travel all around. We know our whole entire country is atop of cave systems. Okay. So there is very likely areas under there where things can travel back and forth without detection, and say could go into a cave system all the way up in Maine and pop up all the way back in California.
Not to get too conspiratorial, but there's some theories, and they're based on witness testimony, that there may be man-made tunnel systems that go across North America, built by our and other governments to, with like high-speed rails and stuff to facilitate transportation for the elite, or for, important members of the military, or to get from one end of the country to the other without having a registered flight path, without announcing their presence. It's not just them, it's us too, probably. But as far as like, yeah, why would animals want to be in caves? Well, nowadays it may be an adaptation, especially for bigger animals that, are doing things we don't like. Humans, we're top dog. And I mean that literally, because we've got technology. And so even though we're weaker and slower and don't see as well as some creatures or whatever, you give a guy a gun, if he knows how to use it, if he's got some tracking skills, some hunting skills, and with the right gun, the right skills, he can pretty much anything on this planet. And I know some people disagree with me, but if we're saying that Dogman is a biological creature, if it's, descendant of these cave hyenas, if it needs to eat, if it needs shelter, then I would say it can, and it probably has before. It probably has been before by humans, rather than be in constant conflict with 330 million humans in America and the United States. They probably decided that caves were a lot safer. Hang out in caves, hide away in caves, use caves for transportation, use them for ambush points, places to feed, places to stash bodies, whatever. Makes sense to me. But
any animal with intellect stays away from people, correct?
Once they learn what we can do, they stay away from us. Yeah, you go to some virgin area of wilderness in, north central Canada, where some people haven't been for 100 years, and even then there were just very few people. They say that the animals are not at all hardly afraid of humans. They don't even know what to think about us. But give us enough time and enough, hunting and of animals, and they quickly learn, hey, we don't want to be around those weird creatures, man. They'll get you. So yeah.
Somebody told me actually with coyotes that they won't even, as soon as they hear any sort of human interaction, for the most part they just boot, because of how much they've been like hunted, and
Sure.
just the negative outlook they have towards people.
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me if even a 600-pound dog man, yeah, he may not be afraid of you one-on-one, and he may not be afraid of you if you don't know he's there, but he doesn't want to attract too much attention, and he wants to have a hideout, for when people start chasing after him, because you get, a group of 4 or 5 guys, and all the stories not all of them, but the vast majority of stories I've heard where people claim to have Dogman, they weren't alone. They were usually with a group of, people who were armed and had the right mindset. And enough bullets, even in one of these creatures, seems to take them down. I know there are people from our group who will disagree and kind of ascribe spiritual powers to them that that'll just make them mad, and then you're gonna. But if we're talking about the more physical Dogman, I would posit that they can die by us. So.
No, that makes sense perfectly. And on a final note here, before we let you go, on a couple of those cases, I'd say more than a couple, where people have shot them, there's more than one Dogman, and they actually pull their wounded or their quote unquote away.
Sure.
People are like, well, wait, animals don't do that. Well, pause for a second. Gorillas actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
Gorillas bury their dead forms of coffins, more or less, with foliage. And how many gorilla skeletons have been found?
100 years ago, the mountain gorillas were a cryptid. They were something that people had seen but didn't have any good evidence for. So yeah, absolutely. They were so stealthy that it, even within the lifetime of some people that are still alive on this planet, they were not an officially recognized species, so.
Yeah, it took Jane Goodell, correct me again if I'm wrong, 5 years more or less before she got any sort of interaction with them, and she could see some of their signs of their activity. But again, this is just science I'm trying to bring to the aspect when people want to be like, oh, no remains, no body parts. Well, there are other animals that behave in this way, and there's also other footage of gorillas that learned how to take away traps that poachers have put up and tell their young to stay away and show them how to get rid of it. So, I mean, animals are smart.
I mean, how many bear carcasses, have people come across in the woods? I've heard of people saying, yeah, I saw a deer, a dog, various animals, right? But bears are big, and there's actually quite a lot of black bears in the eastern United States. And I've never come across someone who said, yep, found a black bear in the woods when I was out there. The reason why is when they natural causes, they tend to go off to the deepest, darkest, most tangled thickets so they can be at peace, basically. And so it's going to be a place people just don't go to, It's,
How many cats that have people have lost? Your pet cat, if it's an
yeah.
outdoor and indoor cat, and when it goes outside, 100%, it goes to somewhere when it's passing, and then how many times do you find the carcass of your cat?
They tend to do that. Dogs will do that too. They'll just, up and walk off, and like I said, find a quiet, cool spot in the shade or whatever, and lay down and die. So yeah, it's not abnormal for creatures, even big creatures, to not leave behind carcasses that are easily found. And in their case, they may be smart enough to know, if at all possible, we don't want our carcasses being found, because that's just going to attract more and more attention. So.
It's no different, again, than like a cat. Say when it's outside, it uses the bathroom and it scrapes and covers it up. It doesn't want attention drawn. So same thing. I mean, it's not, yeah, animals are intellectual. But thank you so much for stopping by tonight. I appreciate you coming in with some of the great philosophies and information you have. And I can't wait to get you back on next time. And I do look forward to everything, man.
Yeah, well, it was fun, man. The time flew by this time, didn't it? So, yeah, next time you want to talk, just shoot me a message, and we'll come up with some more subjects. It'll be fun.
Thank you for everyone who stopped by tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. If you do enjoy my content, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm. And until next time, stay safe.